No idea that beneath the cracked concrete floor lay a hidden basement containing thousands of FBI cold case files that would ultimately solve America's most notorious unsolved murder cases and expose a web of corruption reaching the highest levels of law enforcement. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Olivia clutched the eviction notice in her trembling hands, the crisp official paper a stark contrast to the chaos surrounding her in the small apartment she'd called home for the past 3 years. The building had been sold to a luxury condo developer, and all tenants had 60 days to vacate, a deadline that loomed just 3 weeks away. The kitchen table before her was covered with rental listings, each one a harsh reminder of the impossible housing market she was facing. $800 application fee, first and last month's deposit plus security, credit check required, Olivia muttered to herself, circling another unaffordable option in red. At 34, with a decade of experience as a paralegal at a small-town law firm in Meridian Creek, she earned just enough to keep herself and her son Miguel afloat, but nowhere near enough to meet the skyrocketing rental requirements of the rapidly gentrifying town. The apartment they currently rented, a modest 2-bedroom unit in the older part of town, had been affordable at $950 a month. The new listings showed similar spaces starting at $1,800, nearly double what she'd been paying. The economic boom that had brought tech companies and wealthy professionals to Meridian Creek had been great for the town's tax base, but devastating for working-class residents like Olivia. Rain pattered against the kitchen window as she pushed aside the listings and opened her laptop. Her savings account balance glared back at her, $8,242. 17. It represented 3 years of careful budgeting, overtime hours, and sacrificed vacations. This money was supposed to be Miguel's college fund, not an emergency housing solution. "Mom?" Miguel's voice came from the doorway, his small frame silhouetted against the hallway light. He clutched his treasured sketchbook, a gift from his art teacher who had recognized his talent early, and watched her with the careful, measured concern that children of struggling single parents often develop too young. "Are we really going to have to move?" Olivia quickly closed the eviction notice folder and forced a smile. "We might need to find a new place, yes, but don't worry, we're going to find something even better." The lie tasted bitter, but she couldn't bear to add her housing anxiety to the burdens her son already carried. The absence of his father, who had walked out when Miguel was just 2. The second-hand clothes, the missed field trips when money was particularly tight. Miguel nodded solemnly. At 10, he was perceptive enough to sense the gravity of their situation, but young enough to still believe that his mother could fix anything. "Can I have the room with the big window in our new place? For better light when I draw?" "I'll do my best, mijo," Olivia promised, her heart breaking at his simple request. A room with a window, it shouldn't be an extravagance, yet here they were. After tucking Miguel into bed with promises of house-hunting adventures over the weekend, Olivia returned to her desperate search. She expanded her parameters, looking at neighboring communities, considering longer commutes, even researching temporary housing options like extended-stay motels, all financially out of reach or unsuitable for raising a child. It was nearly midnight when she stumbled across an unusual listing on the county website: public auction, commercial property foreclosure. The description was sparse. Former gas station and convenience store, 1-2 acres, structure requires significant renovation. Starting bid, $5,000. Property sold, Aziz. The listing included a grainy photo of a 1960s-era gas station with boarded windows and faded signage. Weeds pushed through cracks in the concrete, and the gas pumps had long since been removed, leaving only concrete islands as evidence of the building's former purpose. Located on the outskirts of Meridian Creek, the property had been abandoned. For nearly a decade after the construction of the highway bypass had diverted traffic away from the once busy road. Olivia almost scrolled past it. What good was a dilapidated commercial building to a single mother in need of housing? But something made her pause. The property included living quarters, according to the detailed description. The original owner had lived above the store in a modest apartment. With 200 square feet of commercial space below and 800 square feet of living space above, it offered more room than their current apartment. The auction was scheduled for the following morning at the county courthouse. Minimum bid, $5,000. Olivia stared at her savings account balance again. $8,342.17. It was theoretically possible, but was it madness to even consider it? Converting a commercial property into a proper home would require renovations, permits, possibly rezoning, yet the property taxes would be lower than in town. The land offered space Miguel had never had, and most importantly, it would be theirs. No landlords, no rent increases, no more eviction notices. Sleep eluded her as her mind raced through calculations, possibilities, and potential disasters. By dawn, she had made her decision. It was risky, possibly foolish, certainly desperate, but it was also their only viable option. She called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years, dropped Miguel at school with an extra tight hug, and drove to the county courthouse with a cashier's check for $8,000, nearly every penny she had. The courthouse auction room was sparsely populated that Friday morning. A few professional property developers stood in small groups, discussing investment opportunities in low voices. An elderly couple sat in the back row, clutching paperwork. A man in an expensive suit scrolled through his phone, looking bored. None of them gave Olivia a second glance as she slipped into a seat, feeling acutely out of place in her department. Store blazer and sensible shoes. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The auctioneer, a county clerk named Walter Hammond, with a monotone voice and efficient manner, moved through the first few properties quickly. Vacant lots and tax-delinquent houses were sold to the developers at slightly above minimum bid. The elderly couple won a small residential property after a brief bidding war. Then, finally, Lot 17, former Pinewood Gas and Service Station, won. 2 acres, commercial zoning with residential unit, starting bid $5,000. Do I have $5,000? Olivia raised her bidder card, her hand steadier than she expected. $5,000 from bidder number 23, the auctioneer acknowledged. Do I have $5,500? The man in the expensive suit raised his card casually. $5,500 from bidder number 8. Do I have $6,000? Olivia raised her card again, heart pounding. This was happening too quickly. She hadn't prepared for a bidding war. $6,000 from bidder 23. Do I have $6,500? The suited man glanced at Olivia briefly, then raised his card again. The bidding continued. $7,000 from Olivia, $7,500 from the suited man. As the price approached her limit, Olivia felt cold dread settling in her stomach. What would she do if she lost this auction? Where would they go? $7,500 going once. Olivia raised her card one final time. $7,800, she called out, voice cracking slightly. It was 542s, 17 more than she had planned to spend, leaving her with exactly 542. 17 in savings, barely enough for immediate repairs and utility connections. The suited man looked at her, then down at his phone, then back at her. He shook his head slightly. $7,800 going once, going twice. Sold to bidder number 23 for $7,800. The wooden gavel struck the podium with a sound that seemed to reverberate through Olivia's entire body. She had done it. They had a home, or at least they had a dilapidated former gas station that might someday be a home. The next hour passed in a blur of paperwork, signatures and payments. By noon, Olivia Ramirez was the legal owner of the former Pinewood Gas and Service Station. The property came with a set of rusted keys and a thick folder of documentation about underground storage tank removal, environmental clearances, and zoning information. The previous owners had at least properly decommissioned the gas station. Components, removing the fuel tanks and remediating the soil, essential steps that would have been financially impossible for Olivia to manage. As she drove to the property, her property, Olivia oscillated between elation and terror. What had she done? Was this a brilliant solution or the biggest mistake of her life? How would she explain to Miguel that they would be living above an abandoned gas station? The reality of her purchase was even more daunting in person. The faded sign reading Pinewood Gas and Service hung precariously from one corner. The large plate glass windows of the convenience store were boarded with weather-worn plywood. The concrete apron where gas pumps once stood was cracked, with determined weeds pushing through every fissure. A rusted bell still hung above where the service bay had been, silent for years. Yet there was also unexpected charm. The building itself was solidly constructed of red brick with Art Deco details that spoke to its 1960s origins. Behind the main structure, mature oak trees provided shade over what might become a yard for Miguel. The location, while isolated, offered views of rolling hills and a creek that ran along the back of the property. It was quiet, almost peaceful. Olivia used the larger of the rusted keys to unlock the main entrance to the convenience store. The door protested with a screech of neglected hinges, but opened to reveal a space frozen in time. Dusty shelving units stood in orderly rows. An antique cash register still sat on the counter. Faded posters advertising cigarettes and soft drinks hung crookedly on the walls. Everything was covered in a thick layer of dust and cobwebs, but the structure itself seemed sound. No obvious water damage, no sagging floors. A door behind the counter led to a staircase ascending to the apartment above. The living quarters were modest, but surprisingly well preserved. A small kitchen with vintage appliances, a living room with large windows overlooking the front of the property, a bathroom with chipped but functional fixtures, and 2 bedrooms, the smaller of which had a window that would provide excellent natural light for an aspiring young artist. Olivia stood in the center of what would be their living room, mentally cataloguing the work ahead. Cleaning, painting, replacing the ancient carpet, updating the electrical system, connecting utilities. It was overwhelming, but not impossible. With her paralegal salary and some careful budgeting, they could make incremental improvements while living there. It wouldn't be perfect, but it would be theirs. She returned to the lower level to further assess the commercial space. The convenience store area was approximately 800 square feet, with an additional 400 square feet that had once been a service bay for minor auto repairs. The service bay had a hydraulic lift still embedded in the floor, non-functional but too expensive to remove. The concrete floor was stained with decades of oil and grease, but was otherwise intact. It was while examining this floor that Olivia noticed something odd. In the back corner of the service bay, partially hidden by an old workbench, the concrete appeared different, newer perhaps, or poured separately from the rest of the floor. A thin seam outlined a rectangular area approximately 4 feet by 3 feet. Curious, Olivia pushed the heavy workbench aside with effort. The rectangular outline became more obvious. It almost looked like a trapdoor. She knelt and ran her fingers along the seam. Yes, definitely intentional. One edge had a small indentation that might serve as a handle. Using a screwdriver from an abandoned toolbox, Olivia managed to pry up the edge of the concrete panel. It was lighter than it appeared. Not solid concrete, but a cleverly disguised door made of thin concrete over a metal frame. The panel lifted to reveal a set of narrow stairs descending into darkness. Olivia hesitated. Every horror movie she'd ever seen advised against descending mysterious staircases in abandoned buildings. But this was her building now, and she needed to know exactly what she had purchased. Using the flashlight on her phone, she carefully made her way down the stairs. The basement was not listed in any of the property documents. It was approximately 600 square feet, with a low ceiling and concrete walls. Unlike the neglected spaces above, this room appeared to have been actively used much more recently. A metal desk sat against one wall, flanked by tall filing cabinets. A corkboard covered with faded papers hung opposite. A single bare bulb hung from the ceiling, connected to a pull chain. Olivia tugged the chain, and remarkably, the light came on, illuminating a space that made her breath catch. The filing cabinets, 6 of them industrial grade and locked, were labeled with years spanning from 1967 to 1998. The corkboard was covered with crime scene photos, newspaper clippings, and handwritten notes connected by red string in the classic detective style. And most disturbingly, the desk held an official-looking leather portfolio embossed with the letters FBI. Her paralegal training immediately recognized the nature of the space. This was an investigation room, a place where someone, presumably with FBI connections, had been working on cases in secret away from official channels. But why here, in an abandoned gas station in Meridian Creek? With trembling hands, Olivia opened the leather portfolio. Inside was an ID badge for Special Agent Robert Caldwell, FBI, with an issue date of 1976. Beneath it was a handwritten note, dated August 14, 1998. To whoever finds this room, these files represent 30 years of work on cases that the Bureau officially closed or refused to pursue. They contain evidence of crimes committed by powerful people who have thus far escaped justice. I am no longer in a position to continue this work. I entrust these records to the future in the hope that someone with courage will bring this information to light when the time is right. The key to the filing cabinets is taped beneath the desk. RC. Taped under the desk, just as promised, was a small keyring with 6 keys, each labeled to correspond with a filing cabinet. With increasing disbelief, Olivia opened the first cabinet, labeled 1967-1972. Inside were meticulously organized case files, each in a separate folder with dates, locations, and case numbers clearly marked. The first file she pulled contained photographs, interview transcripts, forensic reports, and detailed notes about a 1968 murder that, according to the notes, had been officially attributed to a drifter, but actually showed evidence of being connected to a prominent business owner in Chicago. The second file documented a series of disappearances in rural Kentucky that local authorities had dismissed as runaways, but which Agent Caldwell had linked to a county sheriff and several deputies. Evidence that would have proven their involvement had mysteriously vanished from official records, but was preserved here in duplicate. Olivia sat heavily in the desk chair, trying to process what she was seeing. This was not just a collection of cold cases. It was evidence of systematic cover-ups involving law enforcement officials, wealthy businessmen, and politicians. If authentic, these files contained information that could reopen dozens of cases, bring justice to victims' families, and expose corruption at multiple levels of government and law enforcement. As a paralegal, Olivia understood enough about chain of custody and evidence handling to recognize the legal complexities of what she had discovered. These files had been removed from official channels, stored in an unauthorized location, and were now in the possession of a civilian with no legal authority to act on them. Using them to reopen cases would be challenging at best, potentially impossible at worst. Yet the human impact was undeniable. Each folder represented victims who had never received justice, families who still lived with unanswered questions, communities that had been lied to by those in power. How could she ignore that? The sound of her phone ringing startled her back to the present moment. It was the school. Miguel needed to be picked up in 20 minutes. Olivia carefully replaced the files, locked the cabinets, turned off the light, and closed the trapdoor, positioning the workbench back over it. She needed time to think, to process, to decide what to do with this explosive discovery. As she drove to Miguel's school, her mind raced with questions. Who was Robert Caldwell and what had happened to him? Why had he chosen this particular location to hide his investigation? How many cases in those cabinets might still be solvable, even decades later? And most pressingly, what was her responsibility now that she had found them? Miguel bounded into the car with his usual energy, his backpack stuffed with art supplies and his mind full of stories from the day. "Mom, did you find us a new place to live?" he asked immediately, ever focused on their housing situation. Olivia took a deep breath. "I did, mijo. It's a bit unusual, but I think you're going to love it. It has a big yard, lots of space, and a room with a perfect window for your drawing." "Really? When can we see it?" "How about right now?" Olivia suggested, turning the car toward their new home and the secret it contained. Miguel's initial reaction to the abandoned gas station was exactly what Olivia had feared. Confusion, followed by dismay. "We're going to live here?" he asked, looking up at the dilapidated building with wide eyes. "It needs some work," Olivia admitted, "but it has so much potential. Come see inside before you decide." She led him through the convenience store area, watching his expression shift from skepticism to curiosity as he explored the unusual space. "This could be like our own private museum," he suggested, running his fingers along the dusty counter. "Or maybe a studio for my art." The apartment above won him over completely. The smaller bedroom, with its large east-facing window, would indeed provide perfect light for drawing. The living room was larger than their current apartments, and the kitchen, though outdated, had a certain retro charm that appealed to Miguel's artistic sensibilities. "And look," Olivia said, leading him to the back of the property where the oak trees created a natural canopy. "All this space is ours. You could have a treehouse, or we could plant a garden." Miguel's imagination caught fire. By the time they returned to their apartment to begin packing, he was bubbling with ideas for their new home, where his drawing table would go, how they could paint his room, the possibility of adopting a dog now that they had space for one. Olivia listened and encouraged his enthusiasm, all while keeping the basement and its contents locked firmly in a separate compartment of her mind. That was a problem for after they had moved, after they had established their new life. For now, she needed to focus on the practical challenges of transforming an abandoned gas station into a home. The next 2 weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. Olivia took a week of vacation time to make the space minimally habitable. She hired an electrician to check the wiring and a plumber to restore water service. She scrubbed years of dust and grime from every surface, painted the apartment walls in cheerful colors chosen by Miguel, and installed new locks on all doors. Friends from work helped move their modest furniture, and neighbors, intrigued by the unusual project, dropped by with housewarming gifts and offers of assistance. Through it all, Olivia kept the basement secret. She had secured the trap door more effectively, placing a heavy storage cabinet over it, and had not returned to the underground room since her initial discovery. But she thought about it constantly, weighing her options, considering the implications, researching Agent Robert Caldwell in her spare moments. What she found was troubling. Robert Caldwell had been a respected FBI agent from 1972 until his apparent suicide in 1998, the same year as his final note in the basement. According to sparse newspaper accounts, he had been found dead in his car from carbon monoxide poisoning, with a brief note attributing his decision to personal demons. His obituary mentioned an exemplary career, a wife who had predeceased him, and no children. Former colleagues described him as dedicated and meticulous, exactly the kind of agent who might have kept detailed records of cases he couldn't let go. But the timing raised alarming questions. Had Caldwell actually committed suicide, or had his death been arranged by someone who wanted his investigations permanently stopped? The gas station property, Olivia discovered, had been owned by Caldwell's cousin, who had continued to pay the taxes on it until his own death in 2014, after which it had eventually been foreclosed upon by the county. Had the cousin known about the basement and its contents? Had he been protecting his relative's legacy? 3 weeks after moving in, with Miguel settled into his new school routine and the apartment gradually becoming more comfortable, Olivia finally returned to the basement. On a Friday night, after Miguel had fallen asleep, she moved the storage cabinet, opened the trap door, and descended once more into Agent Caldwell's secret investigation room. This time, she approached it methodically, like the legal professional she was. She began by photographing the room exactly as she had found it, the arrangement of the desk, the corkboard, the filing cabinets, to document the original state. Then she started a catalogue, listing each file by its case number, date, location, and a brief description of the crime and suspects involved. The work was sobering. Case after case revealed the same pattern. Investigations stalled or redirected when they implicated powerful individuals, evidence that disappeared from official records, witnesses who changed testimony after unexplained. Pressure detectives reassigned when they pushed too hard for answers. The victims were predominantly those on society's margins: sex workers, immigrants, racial minorities, political activists, people whose deaths or disappearances generated little sustained public attention. But one case, filed in the cabinet, labeled 1993-1998, made Olivia's blood run cold. The folder was thicker than most, its contents spilling out despite the elastic bands holding it closed. The case number and location immediately caught her attention. It had occurred in Meridian Creek. On May 17, 1995, a local environmental activist named Teresa Vega had been found dead in her home, apparently from accidental carbon monoxide poisoning, caused by a faulty furnace. The official investigation had been brief, the case quickly closed, but Caldwell's files told a different story. Teresa Vega had been investigating industrial pollution in Meridian Creek's watershed, specifically chemical dumping by North Star Manufacturing, the town's largest employer at the time. She had collected water samples, documented fish kills, and gathered testimony from former employees about illegal disposal practices. According to Caldwell's notes, she had been preparing to present her findings to state environmental authorities and a major newspaper the week after her death. Caldwell had meticulously documented inconsistencies in the official investigation. The furnace that had supposedly malfunctioned had been inspected and certified safe just 2 weeks earlier. Vega's computer and research notes had disappeared. From her home, the carbon monoxide levels in her blood work were inconsistent with the supposed length of exposure. Most disturbing of all, Caldwell had connected Vega's death to 2 North Star executives and the then sheriff of Meridian County. Through financial records, witness statements, and surveillance photographs, evidence that had never been part of the official investigation. One of those executives, Douglas Harmon, was now the mayor of Meridian Creek. Olivia sat back, her hands shaking. This wasn't some distant case from another state or decade. This had happened here, in her community, and one of the people implicated currently held public office. The implications were staggering and dangerous. She read further. Caldwell's investigation into Vega's death appeared to have been what led him down the rabbit hole that eventually connected to his own apparent suicide. His notes became increasingly paranoid in tone during 1997 and early 1998, referencing surveillance, threats, and obstacles from within the Bureau itself. His final entries suggested he believed his life was in danger. Had Caldwell been murdered? To prevent him from exposing the truth about Teresa Vega and potentially dozens of other cases? Had the same people responsible for his death arranged it to look like suicide, just as they had apparently done with Vega's accidental carbon monoxide poisoning? As the implications sank in, Olivia realized the precariousness of her situation. She was now in possession of evidence that implicated powerful people in serious crimes, people who might still be willing to take drastic measures to keep these secrets buried. She had a child to protect, a new home to secure, a life that could be upended or worse. Yet she also had a strong sense of justice, a career built on respect for the legal system, and now knowledge she couldn't simply ignore. Teresa Vega had died trying to protect her community from environmental harm. Robert Caldwell had potentially died trying to expose the truth about her murder and many others. What responsibility did that place on Olivia's shoulders? She carefully replaced the Vega file, locked the cabinet, and returned to the apartment, her mind racing with possibilities and dangers. Sleep eluded her as she weighed her options. She could anonymously turn all the files over to federal authorities, but could she trust them when Caldwell's own notes suggested corruption within the FBI itself? Contact a journalist or documentary filmmaker who could help bring these cases to public attention, but that would mean sacrificing her anonymity and potentially putting herself and Miguel at risk. Focus only on the Vega case, which had the most direct connection to her community and the most currently relevant implications. But even that carried significant dangers. Reseal the basement and pretend she had never found it. But could she live with herself knowing what she now knew? As dawn broke, Olivia reached a decision. She would not act rashly or out of emotion. She would approach this as she did her work as a paralegal, methodically, legally, and with careful documentation. She would need help, but she would choose her confidants carefully. First, she would need legal counsel, someone who understood criminal evidence and prosecutorial procedures. Then she would need investigative support, someone who could help verify Caldwell's findings and potentially gather additional evidence. Finally, she would need security, protections for herself and Miguel if things went badly. Most importantly, she would need to move cautiously. The files had remained hidden for over 20 years. A few more months wouldn't change the outcome for cases this cold. She had time to plan, to build a strategy, to ensure that when she did act, it would be effective. As Miguel awoke and began his Saturday morning routine of cartoons and cereal, Olivia watched him with a new awareness of vulnerability and strength. She had bought this property to provide security for her son, never imagining it would thrust her into a moral crucible that pitted that very security against her sense of justice. The former gas station with its secret basement had changed everything. What had begun as a desperate solution to a housing crisis had become something far more consequential, a chance to right historical wrongs, to bring justice to victims. Long forgotten, to hold accountable those who believed their power placed them above the law. Olivia Ramirez, single mother and paralegal, had accidentally stepped into a role she never sought. Custodian of truth, potential administrator of justice, keeper of secrets that could reshape her community, and possibly the understanding of how power and law enforcement had intersected for decades. The journey ahead would be dangerous, complex, and life-changing. But as she watched her son sketching happily at their kitchen table, sunlight streaming through the window, she had promised him. Olivia knew she couldn't walk away from the responsibility she had unknowingly purchased, along with this unlikely home. The abandoned gas station had offered them shelter. The secret basement had offered her purpose. Together, they would transform not just her family's life, but potentially the lives of countless others who had been denied justice for far too long. She just had to figure out how to do it without getting herself, or worse, Miguel, killed in the process. When Olivia Ramirez descended those hidden basement stairs for the third time, she carried with her 3 essential items: a high-resolution camera, a notebook, and a newly purchased burner phone. 2 weeks had passed since her initial discovery of Agent Caldwell's hidden case files, and in that time, she had crafted a methodical approach to handling the explosive information now literally beneath her feet. Tonight, with Miguel sleeping soundly at his grandmother's house for their regular weekend visit, she would begin documenting everything properly. The basement's single bulb cast harsh shadows across the investigation room as Olivia set up her makeshift workstation. She had researched proper evidence handling procedures, consulted archival preservation websites, and studied journalistic methods for protecting sensitive sources. She was no professional investigator, but her paralegal training had taught her the importance of meticulous documentation and chain of custody. "One case at a time," she whispered to herself, opening the filing cabinet labeled 1993-1998 and retrieving the Teresa Vega file once again. The local environmentalist's death had occurred in Meridian Creek itself, involved the current mayor, and demonstrated a pattern that matched Caldwell's own apparent suicide, making it the logical starting point for her investigation. Olivia began photographing each document, each photograph, each handwritten note in the file, ensuring that metadata was stripped from the digital images and that they were immediately uploaded to an encrypted cloud storage account she had created specifically for this purpose. The work was tedious but necessary. If anything happened to the physical files, or to Olivia herself, this digital record would survive. The details of Teresa Vega's case became clearer with each document. The young environmental activist had documented extensive chemical dumping by North Star Manufacturing into Crawley Creek, which fed into the Meridian River. Water samples she had collected showed alarming levels of industrial solvents, heavy metals, and other toxins. Former employees had provided her with internal memos showing that executives, including Douglas Harmon, now Meridian Creek's mayor, had knowingly authorized the illegal disposal to save millions in proper waste management costs. Most disturbing were Caldwell's notes connecting Vega's death to a conspiracy involving Harmon, another North Star executive named Richard Blackwell, and then Sheriff James Denton. Bank records showed a $50,000 payment from a North Star shell company to Denton's brother-in-law 2 days after Vega's death. Maintenance records revealed that someone claiming to be from the gas company had accessed Vega's furnace the day before she died, though the official investigation never mentioned this visit. "They killed her," Olivia murmured, the reality of it settling like a stone in her stomach. "They actually murdered her to cover up their pollution, and they've been getting away with it for 25 years. As she continued documenting the file, Olivia discovered something else significant. Caldwell had been investigating Vega's death unofficially. His case notes indicated that when he had tried to open an official FBI investigation based on evidence of interstate criminal conspiracy, the chemicals had affected waterways crossing into the neighboring state. He had been shut down by his superiors. That was when he began working the case on his own time, using this secret location to store evidence that kept disappearing from official channels. By 3:00 a.m., Olivia had completely documented the Vega file and had started cross-referencing it with other cases in Caldwell's collection. A pattern emerged. Over 30 years, Caldwell had identified at least 17 deaths officially ruled as accidents or suicides that showed evidence of being murders disguised to silence individuals who threatened powerful interests. The victims included environmental activists like Vega, investigative journalists, whistleblowers from corporations and government agencies, and even fellow law enforcement officers who had pushed investigations too far. More chilling still was evidence that these weren't isolated incidents, but part of what Caldwell had termed systematic cleanup operations, coordinated efforts to eliminate threats to corporate, political, or criminal interests. In some cases, he had traced the executors of these operations to a small group of former military and intelligence personnel who appeared to work as contractors for various powerful entities. As dawn broke, casting pale light through the small basement window wells, Olivia finally packed up her equipment. She had documented 2 complete case files and had begun to understand the magnitude of what Caldwell had uncovered and why it might have cost him his life. The question now was what to do with this information. She couldn't simply walk into the FBI field office with files that had been illegally removed from official channels. She couldn't trust local law enforcement when a former sheriff was implicated, and approaching journalists would immediately put her and Miguel in the spotlight and potentially in danger. Olivia locked the filing cabinets, turned off the light, and ascended the stairs, securing the trapdoor behind her. As she moved the heavy storage cabinet back into place, her phone chimed with a message from her mother. "Miguel wants pancakes for breakfast. What time will you pick him up?" The ordinary question jolted Olivia back to her regular life, a life that now seemed to exist in parallel with the shadowy world she had discovered beneath her new home. How could she be contemplating exposing decades-old murder conspiracies while also planning Sunday pancakes with her son? Yet that contradiction was precisely what gave her clarity. She had bought this property to provide security for Miguel, and now she possessed information that threatened that very security. The only way forward was to resolve this situation as quickly and safely as possible, which meant finding the right allies and developing a comprehensive strategy. After picking up Miguel and enduring a detailed account of his sleepover adventures, Olivia made a decision. There was one person from her professional life who might be able to help, someone with the right expertise and, more importantly, impeccable integrity. Monday morning, she stepped into the office of Alan Rosenberg, the senior partner at the small law firm where she worked. A former prosecutor with 30 years of experience in criminal law, Rosenberg had a reputation for absolute ethical standards and had occasionally handled pro bono cases for environmental causes. "Alan, I need to speak with you confidentially." "About a legal matter," Olivia said, closing his office door. "It's not about work, and I'd understand if you need to refer me elsewhere, but I trust your judgment." The silver-haired attorney gestured for her to sit. "Of course, Olivia. What's on your mind?" For the next 20 minutes, Olivia outlined her discovery in careful terms, emphasizing the legal implications rather than the conspiracy aspects that might sound far-fetched. She explained about finding documentation suggesting Teresa Vega's death had been staged, mentioned the apparent connection to current Mayor Harmon, and described the similar pattern with Caldwell's own death. Rosenberg listened without interruption, his expression growing increasingly grave. When she finished, he sat in silence for nearly a minute before speaking. "You understand the seriousness of what you're describing. These aren't just cold cases. You're talking about potentially exposing powerful people who, if your assessment is correct, have already committed murder to protect themselves." "I do understand," Olivia replied. "That's why I came to you. I need to handle this properly, legally and safely." Rosenberg nodded slowly. "I'd need to see these files myself before offering specific advice, but speaking generally, information like this would need to be turned over to federal authorities, not local ones, for obvious reasons. It would require careful handling to maintain chain of custody and credibility. And what about my safety? And Miguel's?" The attorney's expression softened slightly. That's my primary concern as well. Let me make some discreet inquiries. I have contacts at the Justice Department who operate outside the normal FBI channels, people who handle internal investigations and public corruption cases. They might be our best option. Olivia felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She wasn't alone in this anymore. Thank you, Alan. I wasn't sure you'd even believe me. In 30 years of legal practice, I've learned that corruption and cover-ups are far more common than most people realize, he replied grimly. Give me 48 hours and don't discuss this with anyone else. And Olivia, be careful. Don't return to those files until we have a proper security plan in place. For the next 2 days, Olivia went through the motions of normal life, working at the office, helping Miguel with homework, continuing the gradual renovation of their unusual home. But her mind remained fixed on the secret beneath the storage cabinet and the looming decision about how to proceed. Wednesday evening, Rosenberg called her from what he identified as a secure line. I've arranged a meeting with someone who can help tomorrow night, 8 p.m. at my fishing cabin. Can you get childcare? The following evening, after dropping Miguel at her mother's house with the explanation of a work emergency, Olivia drove 30 miles to Rosenberg's remote fishing cabin. The small wooden structure sat on 10 acres of woodland beside a small, private lake, far from neighbors or passing traffic. As she pulled up, she noted 2 vehicles already parked beside Rosenberg's familiar Volvo, an unmarked black SUV and a modest sedan with government plates. Her heart rate accelerated. This was really happening. Inside the cabin, Rosenberg made introductions. Olivia, this is Special Agent Diana Chen from the Justice Department's Public Integrity Section, and this is Michael Winters, formerly of the Washington Post, now an independent investigative journalist specializing in government accountability. Chen was a compact woman in her 40s, with an intense gaze and economical movements. Ms. Ramirez, I understand you've come into possession of potentially significant evidence regarding several cold cases, including some that may involve current public officials. Winters, older with salt and pepper hair and the rumpled appearance of a career journalist, studied Olivia with open curiosity. Alan says you found Robert Caldwell's files. I knew Caldwell. We worked together on a case in 1992. His suicide never made sense to me. Over the next hour, Olivia detailed her discovery and the contents of the files she had begun to document. Chen asked precise technical questions about chain of custody and file organization. Winters focused on the broader patterns and connections between cases. Both took extensive notes. If what you're describing is accurate, Chen said finally, these files could be the basis for reopening multiple investigations, including public corruption cases that would fall under federal jurisdiction. But extracting them from your property and introducing them as evidence presents significant challenges. And significant dangers, Winters added. If Caldwell was indeed murdered for investigating these cases, the same people or their associates are likely still in positions of power and would go to great lengths to suppress this information again. Rosenberg leaned forward. Which is why we need a comprehensive strategy, one that prioritizes Olivia and Miguel's safety while ensuring these files reach the proper authorities and receive appropriate investigation. Chen nodded. I can arrange for a small team from my section to document and secure the files, people who operate independently from regular bureau channels. We can establish federal protection for you and your son if necessary. But there's another approach worth considering, Winters interjected. The most effective protection might be publicity, not for you personally, but for the information. If these cases become widely known, it becomes much harder for anyone to suppress them again or to harm those who brought them forward. The conversation continued late into the night, weighing options, risks, and legal implications. By the time they reached agreement on a path forward, the plan had multiple layers of protection built in. Chen would bring a small, trusted team to properly document and secure all files, creating an official chain of custody. Winters would prepare journalistic accounts of key cases, ready to publish if necessary, to prevent suppression. Olivia and Miguel would temporarily relocate during the initial phase of the operation, with federal protection if required. Rosenberg would establish a legal trust to manage potential whistleblower protections and any eventual financial implications of the cases. As Olivia drove home that night, her mind spinning with the enormity of what they were undertaking, she felt both terror and resolve. In just a few weeks, her life had transformed from that of an ordinary single mother focused on basic security to someone at the center of what might become one of the most significant cold case revelations in decades. The operation began 3 days later. On a Saturday, when Miguel was scheduled for an overnight camping trip with his school, Agent Chen arrived with a team of 4 specialists in an unmarked van. They worked with methodical efficiency, photographing the basement room exactly as Caldwell had left it, then documenting each file with forensic precision. By Sunday evening, they had processed 3 of the 6 filing cabinets, focusing first on the most recent cases where suspects were likely still alive. The Teresa Vega case quickly became a priority. Chen's preliminary assessment confirmed Olivia's interpretation. The evidence strongly suggested murder disguised as an accident, with clear connections to North Star manufacturing executives and local law enforcement. Moreover, the statute of limitations had not expired for the murder, the environmental crimes, or the subsequent cover-up. This one alone would justify federal intervention, Chen told Olivia as they reviewed the documentation. The interstate pollution aspects, the corruption of local law enforcement, the connection to a current public official, it checks all the boxes for a Justice Department public corruption case. The investigation accelerated over the following week. Chen's team completed their documentation of all 6 filing cabinets, securing digital and physical copies of every document. Winters began discreetly verifying key aspects of selected cases, confirming that victims' families were still seeking answers and that witnesses identified in Caldwell's notes might still be available to testify. Most significantly, Chen located 3 former FBI agents who had worked with Caldwell and had harbored similar suspicions about his death. One of them, now retired in Arizona, provided additional context that strengthened the case. Caldwell had contacted him just weeks before his death, expressing concern that he was being followed and that his home had been searched. As the pieces came together, the magnitude of what they had uncovered became increasingly clear. Caldwell's files contained evidence connecting over 40 suspicious deaths to a network of corporate executives, politicians, and corrupted law enforcement officials. The cases spanned 17 states and 3 decades, suggesting a level of coordinated criminal activity that went far beyond isolated incidents. For Olivia, the investigation brought both vindication and growing anxiety. The validation from Chen and her team confirmed that her discovery was genuinely significant, not just legally, but historically. Yet each new connection they uncovered increased the potential danger to herself and Miguel. The decision point came sooner than expected. 10 days into the investigation, Rosenberg called Olivia at work, his voice tense. "Someone's been asking questions about you at the county records office, specifically about your purchase of the gas station property." The clerk said it was a private investigator claiming to be conducting a routine background check, but he was particularly interested in whether you'd filed any permits for excavation or structural changes. Olivia's blood ran cold. "You think they know? I think we need to accelerate our timeline." Chen agrees. "How quickly can you and Miguel relocate temporarily?" Within 48 hours, Olivia and Miguel had moved into a Justice Department safe house 2 states away. She had explained to Miguel that they needed to take a sudden vacation due to necessary repairs at their home, promising it was temporary. To maintain appearances, Chen's team arranged for lights to operate on timers at the gas station property, and for a maintenance worker to make visible appearances there daily. Meanwhile, the formal investigation began in earnest. Chen presented the evidence to senior Justice Department officials, who authorized the establishment of a special task force to investigate what they were now calling the Caldwell Files. Winters prepared extensive articles documenting the key cases, ready to publish the moment the Justice Department made its first moves. 3 weeks after Olivia's relocation, those moves came with coordinated precision. Federal agents simultaneously executed search warrants at locations connected to suspects in 12 different cases, including Mayor Harmon's office and home in Meridian Creek. The Teresa Vega case, with its strong evidence and connection to current officials, served as the public face of the initial investigation. The media explosion was immediate and overwhelming. FBI reopens dozens of cold cases based on secret files found by single mother, read one headline. Decades-long cover-up of environmental whistleblowers' murder exposed, declared another. Winters' carefully prepared articles provided detailed context about Caldwell's work and the pattern of silenced whistleblowers across multiple industries. For her protection, Olivia's identity remained confidential in the initial wave of reporting, with media referring to her only as the property owner who had discovered Caldwell's files. But as public interest in the story exploded, maintaining that anonymity became increasingly challenging. The breakthrough came from an unexpected direction. Douglas Harmon, facing mounting evidence of his involvement in Teresa Vega's death, and the subsequent cover-up, agreed to cooperate with federal prosecutors in exchange for leniency. His testimony implicated not just his fellow executives at North Star, but also officials in 3 other states who had participated in what he described as problem-solving services, a euphemism for the elimination of individuals who threatened corporate interests. With Harmon's cooperation, the investigation expanded exponentially. Additional arrests followed, including former Sheriff Denton and Richard Blackwell, the other North Star executive implicated in Vega's death. More significantly, investigators identified a network of former military and intelligence personnel who had operated as contractors for corporations and politicians, providing services that ranged from intimidation to staged accidents and suicides. 6 months after Olivia had first descended those basement stairs, the Justice Department held a press conference announcing indictments against 27 individuals in connection with 14 previously unsolved deaths. The press release specifically credited the courage and civic responsibility of a private citizen who discovered critical evidence and brought it to proper authorities. That evening, as Olivia watched the news coverage from the living room of a new, secure residence provided through the Federal Witness Protection Program, Miguel looked up from his homework with a question that cut to the heart of their transformed reality. "Mom, are we ever going back to our gas station? I miss my room with the perfect window." Olivia pulled him close, searching for words to explain their new circumstances. "Not right away, mijo. The work I did, the important thing I found, means we need to stay safe for a while longer. But someday, when everything is settled, we might be able to go back, or maybe we'll find a new place with an even better window." Miguel considered this with the practical acceptance unique to children. "As long as we're together, I guess it's okay. And they said on the news that you helped catch bad guys. That's pretty cool." Pretty cool hardly captured the magnitude of what had occurred, but Olivia appreciated her son's simple framing. She had helped catch bad guys, people who had literally gotten away with murder for decades. Teresa Vega's family finally had answers about her death, Robert Caldwell's apparent suicide had been officially reclassified as a homicide, vindicating his reputation and honoring his dedication. Dozens of other families were receiving long-delayed justice for loved ones whose deaths had been falsely labeled as accidents or suicides. The personal cost had been enormous. Their gas station home, the property she had purchased to provide stability, was now evidence in multiple federal cases. Their identities would eventually need to change for security reasons. Miguel would have to start over at a new school, make new friends, adapt to yet another upheaval in his young life. Yet as Olivia reflected on the journey that had begun with an eviction notice and led to this historic moment of justice, she couldn't bring herself to regret any of it. She had bought a dilapidated gas station out of desperation and discovered not just a home, but a purpose, becoming the caretaker of truth for victims who had been silenced and forgotten. The basement with its hidden files had transformed her from a struggling single mother into a pivotal figure in one of the most significant cold case resolutions in American history. She hadn't sought that role, hadn't imagined herself as a whistleblower or a catalyst for justice. She had simply made the choice that her conscience demanded to bear witness to the truth, regardless of the personal cost. As Miguel drifted off to sleep that night, Olivia sat beside his bed in their temporary home, watching the peaceful rise and fall of his chest. Their future remained uncertain in many ways, filled with testimonies to deliver, trials to attend, and eventually new identities to adopt. But there was also a profound certainty that had been missing from her life before, the knowledge that she had done something unquestionably meaningful, something that had altered the course of justice for dozens of families and potentially prevented future crimes. The abandoned gas station with its secret basement had given them much more than shelter. It had given Olivia a chance to demonstrate to her son, through actions rather than words, that courage and integrity matter, that one person, even without power or resources, can stand against corruption and make a difference. That lesson, she realized, was worth any price they might pay in comfort or convenience. It was the true foundation she'd been trying to build for Miguel all along. Not just walls and a roof, but a legacy of moral courage and a demonstration that justice, while sometimes delayed, should never be abandoned. 5 years had passed since Olivia Ramirez first lifted that concrete trapdoor in an abandoned gas station and discovered Robert Caldwell's meticulously documented files. 5 years of federal investigations, high-profile trials and witness protection. 5 years of new identities, new schools for Miguel, and the constant awareness that their lives had been permanently altered by what lay beneath that service bay floor. Today, Olivia, now known legally as Rebecca Turner, stood at the podium in Georgetown University's largest lecture hall, preparing to give the inaugural address for the Center for Whistleblower Protection and Investigative Justice. The audience before her represented a cross-section of American civic life: law students, journalists, FBI agents, prosecutors, victims' family members, and even a few members of Congress. 5 years ago, she began, her voice steady despite her racing heart, I was a paralegal and single mother facing eviction. I bought an abandoned gas station at a county auction because it was the only housing I could afford. I had no idea that decision would uncover one of the most extensive criminal conspiracies in American history, or that it would transform me from a woman seeking shelter to someone who would help redefine how we understand justice in this country. The room was silent, all eyes fixed on the woman whose discovery had led to the conviction of 73 individuals across 11 states for crimes ranging from murder and conspiracy to obstruction of justice and environmental violations. The Caldwell Files case, as it had come to be known, had become the largest cold case resolution in American history, resulting in the reopening of over 100 investigations previously classified as accidents, suicides, or unsolved homicides. "I want to be clear about something," Olivia continued, scanning the attentive faces. "I'm not a hero. I'm not special. I didn't set out to expose corruption or solve cold cases. I simply made a choice when confronted with evidence of terrible wrongs, the same choice I hope any of you would make. I chose not to look away." In the front row, 15-year-old Miguel, now known as Matthew, watched his mother with unmistakable pride. The skinny 10-year-old, who had once dreamed of a bedroom with perfect light for drawing, had grown into a thoughtful teenager whose experiences had shaped him in extraordinary ways. His artistic talents had flourished despite their upheaval, with his work now focused on themes of justice, hidden truths, and transformation. "What I found beneath that abandoned gas station wasn't just evidence of crimes," Olivia explained. "It was testament to one FBI agent's unwavering commitment to justice. Robert Caldwell spent decades documenting cases that powerful interests wanted buried. When official channels failed, when his own agency blocked his investigations, he created an alternative path to ensure that someday, somehow, the truth would emerge." On the wall behind her, a photograph of Agent Caldwell appeared. Not the grim-faced official FBI portrait that had been used in most news coverage, but a personal photo provided by his sister showing him smiling on a fishing trip, looking like an ordinary man rather than the determined investigator who had sacrificed everything in pursuit of justice. Caldwell never lived to see the impact of his work. He died protecting files that would eventually bring justice to hundreds of victims and their families. He died believing he had failed. But today, we can say with certainty that he succeeded, beyond anything he could have imagined. Olivia detailed the remarkable outcomes of the past 5 years. The Teresa Vega Environmental Justice Act had been signed into law, strengthening protections for environmental whistleblowers and establishing stricter penalties for corporate pollution. The Caldwell Commission had been established to review suspicious deaths of whistleblowers and activists. Most significantly, the FBI had implemented comprehensive reforms to prevent the suppression of investigations involving powerful interests. But statistics and policy changes don't tell the human story, Olivia continued, her voice softening. They don't capture what it meant for Teresa Vega's elderly parents to finally learn the truth about their daughter's death after 25 years of unanswered questions. They don't convey the vindication felt by Caldwell's former colleagues when his supposed suicide was officially reclassified as a homicide. And they certainly don't reflect what it means to families who lived for decades with the false belief that their loved ones took their own lives, when in reality, they were murdered for their principles. The audience remained rapt as Olivia shared stories of particular cases that had been solved through Caldwell's files. Not just the high-profile political murders that had dominated headlines, but lesser-known cases of ordinary people who had stood against corruption and paid the ultimate price. These were not spies or professional activists, she emphasized. They were accountants who noticed financial irregularities, engineers who refused to overlook safety violations, nurses who reported dangerous medical practices, citizens who simply believed in doing what was right regardless of the consequences. As she spoke, Olivia reflected on her own journey, one she rarely discussed in public appearances. The first year after her discovery had been the hardest. Living under federal protection, testifying in closed hearings, watching Miguel struggle to adjust to a new school where he couldn't tell anyone his real background. There had been nights when she questioned whether she had made the right choice, moments when the weight of responsibility for their disrupted lives had felt crushing. The threats had been real and terrifying. 2 attempts to locate them had been thwarted by federal agents. A journalist who had been investigating one of the cases tied to Caldwell's files had been found dead in an apparent robbery, though federal. Prosecutors later proved it was a targeted killing meant to suppress further reporting. The network of corporate, political, and criminal interests implicated in Caldwell's files had resources, connections, and a demonstrated willingness to eliminate threats. Yet, as the cases moved through the justice system and convictions began to accumulate, Olivia had found unexpected strength. Each family that received answers, each wrongfully accused person exonerated, each corrupt official removed from power, all had reinforced her conviction that the sacrifices had been worthwhile. People often ask if I regret finding those files. Olivia told the Georgetown audience, addressing the question that followed her to every speaking engagement. They wonder if I would choose differently, knowing the disruption it would bring to our lives. My answer is always the same. How could I regret being the instrument of justice for so many who had been denied it? How could I regret showing my son that courage matters more than comfort, that truth is worth defending even at great personal cost? In the years since the initial revelations, Olivia had transformed her accidental role as whistleblower into a purposeful career as an advocate. After completing law school, a dream she had previously set aside when Miguel was born, she had established the Caldwell Foundation, a non-profit organization dedicated to supporting whistleblowers and investigating suspicious deaths of activists and truth-tellers. The Foundation's work had expanded beyond the cases in Caldwell's files to identify similar patterns globally: environmental activists dying in accidents in the Amazon, anti-corruption journalists experiencing random violence in Eastern Europe, labor organizers disappearing in Southeast Asia. What Caldwell had documented in America was, they discovered, part of a worldwide phenomenon. What began with a desperate housing search and a concrete trapdoor has become a movement, Olivia explained, gesturing to the international team of investigators, lawyers, and security experts who comprise the Foundation's staff. We now provide legal support, security assistance, and investigative resources to whistleblowers and vulnerable truth-tellers in 27 countries. We've helped establish whistleblower protection legislation in 12 nations. And most importantly, we've created an international rapid response network that can immediately document and publicize suspicious deaths or disappearances of activists before evidence can be destroyed. The audience applauded as Olivia introduced key members of her team, many of them family members of victims identified in Caldwell's files who had transformed their grief into action. Teresa Vega's younger brother, now the Foundation's environmental justice director, the daughter of a labor organizer whose suicide had been exposed as murder. A former FBI colleague of Caldwell's who had come out of retirement to train a new generation of investigators. Our work continues because the forces that silence these voices continue to operate, Olivia said, her tone growing more serious. While we've dismantled one network, others still exist. Corporate interests still find it cheaper to eliminate whistleblowers than to correct their dangerous practices. Political figures still value power over truth. Corrupt law enforcement. Officials still protect the powerful rather than the vulnerable. She paused, surveying the room filled with future lawyers, journalists, and law enforcement officers. Which is why this new Center for Whistleblower Protection and Investigative Justice is so essential. We need to train a generation of professionals who understand these threats and are prepared to counter them, legal experts who can navigate whistleblower protections, journalists who know how to safely report on corruption, investigators who recognize the patterns of disguised assassinations. In the years since her discovery, Olivia had become known not just for exposing past crimes, but for developing practical systems to prevent future ones. The methodologies she had developed, drawing on Caldwell's own techniques and enhanced with modern technology, had been adopted by investigative units worldwide. Her security protocols for protecting vulnerable whistleblowers had become standard practice at human rights organizations globally. The most important lesson from the Caldwell files isn't about the specific crimes they exposed, she continued. It's about the power of documentation and persistence. Caldwell didn't live to see justice served, but he created a record so thorough, so meticulous, that when the right moment came, when those files found their way into the right hands, the truth could no longer be suppressed. Olivia's gaze shifted to Miguel in the front row. And that brings me to the personal lesson I've tried to teach my son throughout this journey. Justice isn't always immediate. Truth doesn't always prevail in the moment. Sometimes the most important thing we can do is to document, preserve, and protect information for a future time when circumstances might be more favorable for accountability. The journey hadn't been without personal costs. Their original identities were permanently behind them. The gas station property had been seized as evidence and later converted into a historical site and small museum dedicated to Caldwell's work. Miguel had attended 3 different schools in 5 years as security concerns necessitated relocations. Romantic relationships had proven particularly challenging for Olivia, with the complexities of her past and ongoing security concerns creating barriers to normal dating experiences. Yet there had also been unexpected gifts. Their relationship with Agent Chen had evolved from professional cooperation to deep friendship, with the Justice Department investigator becoming almost family to them. Michael Winters, the journalist who had helped break the story, had written a best-selling book about the case that had been optioned for a major film. Most meaningfully, they had built connections with dozens of victims' families, creating a community united by their shared commitment to justice. 5 years ago, I was focused on basic survival, finding affordable housing, maintaining stability for my son, making ends meet from paycheck to paycheck, Olivia told the audience. Today, I lead an international organization that has helped solve over 100 previously cold cases and has protected dozens of whistleblowers from suffering the same fate as those in Caldwell's files. She smiled, allowing herself a rare moment of public reflection on the extraordinary path her life had taken. I never set out to become an advocate or an investigator. I certainly never imagined I would be standing before you at Georgetown University, helping launch a center dedicated to the work that found me rather than the work I sought. But I've learned that purpose often finds us in unexpected places, sometimes even beneath the concrete floor of an abandoned gas station. As the lecture concluded and the audience rose in standing ovation, Miguel made his way to the podium to embrace his mother. At 15, he stood eye to eye with her now, no longer the small boy who had worried about having a room with good light for drawing. His artistic talents had evolved into sophisticated graphic investigations, visual documentations of cold cases that combined journalism, art, and advocacy in ways that were earning recognition from major human rights organizations. "You killed it, Mom," he whispered in her ear, using their private joke about killing it in presentations about murder cases. His humor had developed a decidedly dark edge over the years, a coping mechanism for the heavy realities that had shaped his adolescence. The reception following the lecture brought Olivia face to face with people whose lives had been transformed by her discovery. Teresa Vega's parents, now in their 80s, embraced her with tears in their eyes. "Our daughter can rest now," Mrs. Vega said softly, "and so can we." Robert Caldwell's sister, a retired librarian who had never believed her brother's death was suicide, pressed a small package into Olivia's hands. "He would have wanted you to have this," she explained. Inside was Caldwell's FBI badge, officially returned to the family when his case was reclassified as a homicide. "You carried on his work. This belongs with you." As the evening wound down, Senator Eleanor Washington, chair of the Judiciary Committee and the political force behind many of the reforms sparked by the Caldwell files, drew Olivia aside for a private conversation. "The Justice Department has been reviewing your security status," the senator informed her. "They believe the threat level has decreased significantly with most of the major players either incarcerated or deceased. They're preparing to offer you the option of leaving witness protection and reclaiming your original identity if you wish." The possibility sent a wave of conflicting emotions through Olivia. To be Olivia Ramirez again after 5 years as Rebecca Turner, to potentially return to Meridian Creek, reconnect with old friends, visit her mother's grave without security protocols. The idea was both thrilling and terrifying. "What about ongoing cases?" she asked. "There are still trials scheduled, appeals in process." "Those would continue, of course. You'd still need security for court appearances," the senator explained. "But the assessment is that the organized network that posed the greatest threat has been effectively dismantled. The remaining risk is considered manageable with appropriate precautions rather than full identity protection." "I'll need to discuss this with Miguel," Olivia said, glancing across the room to where her son was deep in conversation with a group of law students interested in his visual investigation techniques. "His life has been disrupted enough. Any decision needs to consider his well-being first." Later that night, in the security of their Georgetown apartment, Olivia broached the subject with Miguel as they decompressed from the evening's events. "How would you feel about being Miguel Ramirez again?" she asked carefully, watching his expression. "The Justice Department thinks it might be safe enough now for us to reclaim our real names, maybe even visit Meridian Creek sometimes." Miguel was silent for a long moment, his artist's hands fidgeting with a pencil as he processed the question. "I don't even remember what it feels like to be Miguel Ramirez," he said finally. "I've been Matthew Turner longer than I was ever Miguel. My friends know me as Matt. My art is signed MT. Olivia nodded, understanding the complexity of identity for a child who had spent his formative teenage years living under an assumed name. "We don't have to decide right away. And we could take it in stages, legally reclaiming our names, but continuing to use our current identities professionally, if that feels more comfortable." "Could we visit the gas station?" Miguel asked suddenly. "I've seen pictures from the museum they made, but I'd like to see it for real. I'd like to see the basement where it all started." The question caught Olivia by surprise. They had never returned to the property after entering witness protection, experiencing their former home only through news coverage and photographs as it was transformed from evidence site to historical landmark. The Caldwell Files Discovery Site, as it was now officially designated, had become a pilgrimage destination for law students, journalists, and justice advocates. A physical reminder of how an ordinary place could contain extraordinary truths. "Yes," she said softly, "I think that could be arranged. It might be good for both of us to see it again, to reconnect with where this journey began." As Miguel retired to his room, Olivia stood at the apartment window overlooking the Georgetown campus, reflecting on the circular nature of their journey. They had left behind a gas station in search of safety, only to potentially return now from a position of influence and purpose. They had lost their names, but found their calling. They had sacrificed normalcy, but gained impact. The abandoned gas station with its secret basement had been both the end of one life and the beginning of another. In seeking simply to provide shelter for her son, Olivia had inadvertently become the custodian of truth for hundreds of victims, the catalyst for institutional reforms, and the founder of a movement that was changing how justice functioned across borders. Senator Washington had asked her earlier that evening if she ever wondered about the coincidence. How, of all the properties in the county auction, she had purchased the one containing Caldwell's files. Was it fate, divine intervention, or simply remarkable chance? Olivia had no mystical explanation for how she had become the person to discover those files. But she did believe there was meaning in what had followed, in the choices she had made when confronted with difficult truths, in her decision to pursue justice regardless of personal cost, in the example she had set for her son about courage and responsibility. The gas station had given them shelter when they needed it most. The basement had given her purpose when she least expected it. And now, 5 years later, the legacy of that accidental discovery continued to ripple outward, touching lives across continents, bringing justice to families who had waited decades for truth, and creating systems to protect those who dared to speak out against power. Whatever came next, whether returning to their original identities or continuing as Rebecca and Matthew Turner, whether building the foundation's work or pursuing new challenges, Olivia knew their path had been irrevocably shaped by what lay beneath that concrete floor. Not just files and evidence, but a commitment to truth that had transcended one FBI agent's life and found new expression through an ordinary mother who had simply been looking for an affordable place to live. The abandoned gas station had offered them far more than housing. It had offered them purpose, and in accepting that purpose, they had helped transform the landscape of justice itself. Olivia Ramirez stood before the concrete trapdoor that had changed everything 10 years earlier. The Caldwell Files discovery site, as the converted gas station was now officially known, had been closed to the public for this private visit, allowing her and Miguel to experience the space without the crowds that typically filled the small museum. "It looks smaller than I remember," Miguel observed, now a 20-year-old college junior studying investigative journalism and visual communications at Columbia. His childhood interest in art had evolved into a powerful fusion of graphics and reporting that was already earning him internship offers from major news organizations. "Everything seems smaller when we return as adults," Olivia replied, running her hand along the edge of the trapdoor that was now secured with a transparent barrier to allow visitors to see but not access the historic entrance. But what came from this small space? The decade since her discovery had transformed not just their lives, but the American justice system itself. The Caldwell Files had ultimately led to the conviction of 137 individuals across 17 states for crimes ranging from murder and conspiracy to obstruction of justice. 4 senators, 7 members of Congress, 3 federal judges, and dozens of state and local officials had been removed from office or resigned in disgrace. Corporate executives who had once seemed untouchable had received prison sentences. Law enforcement officials who had protected them were now themselves behind bars, but the greater impact had been systemic. The Caldwell Commission, established by congressional action in the wake of the revelations, had instituted sweeping reforms in how whistleblower cases were handled, how suspicious deaths were investigated, and how powerful interests were held accountable. The Vega Act had created unprecedented protections for environmental whistleblowers and had already prevented an estimated 17 potential murders of activists exposing corporate pollution. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if someone else had bought this place? Miguel asked, his journalist's mind always seeking the alternative narratives, the paths not taken. If the files had stayed hidden another decade, or forever? Olivia considered the question carefully. "I think eventually someone would have found them. Caldwell created these records because he believed in the power of documentation, in creating evidence that could outlast him. He trusted that someday the right person would discover what he'd preserved." They moved through the museum together, experiencing the strange sensation of seeing their own story presented as history. The exhibition began with the county auction, listing and Olivia's original purchase receipt, displayed alongside a recreation of the gas station as it had appeared when she first bought it. Photos showed the cracked concrete, boarded windows, and overgrown lot that had represented her desperate solution to a housing crisis. The next section detailed Robert Caldwell's career and his transition from official FBI investigator to independent documentarian of cases the Bureau wouldn't pursue. His personnel file, officially declassified as part of the subsequent investigations, revealed a dedicated agent whose career had been repeatedly sidelined when his cases threatened powerful interests. Notes from his superiors praised his investigative skills, while warning him about political sensitivities and jurisdictional considerations, bureaucratic language masking the suppression of cases involving the wealthy and connected. He was like you, Miguel said, studying Caldwell's FBI ID photo. Someone who couldn't look away when he saw something wrong, even when it would have been easier. The central exhibit presented selected cases from the files, focusing particularly on Teresa Vega's murder and its connection to environmental crimes in Meridian Creek. The museum didn't shy away from the gruesome details: how her furnace had been deliberately sabotaged, how her research documenting corporate pollution had disappeared, how local law enforcement had participated in the cover-up. But it balanced these facts with testament to Vega's life and work, presenting her not merely as a victim, but as a dedicated activist whose efforts had ultimately led to significant environmental reforms, albeit decades after her death. For Olivia, the most powerful section was the Impact and Legacy Gallery that documented the ripple effects of the Caldwell Files discovery. Here, visitors could read the stories of families who had finally received answers about loved ones' deaths, watch video testimonials from exonerated individuals who had been wrongfully blamed for crimes committed by powerful figures, and learn about the institutional reforms that had resulted from the revelations. A special display honored those who had risked everything to bring the files to public attention. Agent Diana Chen, whose career at the Justice Department had been temporarily derailed but ultimately advanced by her role in the investigation. Michael Winters, whose journalistic coverage had earned him both a Pulitzer Prize and death threats. Alan Rosenberg, whose legal expertise had ensured the evidence was properly handled. And most prominently, Olivia herself, whose decision to pursue justice rather than security had catalyzed everything that followed. "This part always makes me uncomfortable," Olivia admitted, standing before a large photograph of herself from the Georgetown lecture 5 years earlier. "I never set out to be the face of anything. But that's exactly why it had to be you, Mom," Miguel replied, with the insight that had always characterized him even as a child. "You weren't seeking attention or fame. You were just trying to do the right thing. That's what makes it powerful." The final exhibit before exiting presented visitors with a hypothetical scenario involving whistleblowing and asked them to consider what they would do if faced with similar moral choices. Interactive stations allowed them to explore the potential consequences of different decisions, emphasizing that the pursuit of justice often required personal sacrifice, but that systems now existed to provide greater protection and support than had been available to either Caldwell or Olivia when they made their fateful choices. As they completed their tour, the museum's director, Dr. Elaine Jackson, met them in the small conference room that had once been the gas station service. "Bay, we're honored to have you both here," she said, shaking their hands warmly. "Visitors constantly ask when you might make an appearance. Your story resonates so deeply with people. It still feels surreal to see it presented this way," Olivia admitted. "In the moment, I was just a mother trying to make the right decisions day by day. I never imagined it would become this." She gestured to the museum around them. "That's precisely why it's such a powerful educational tool," Dr. Jackson explained. "You've shown people that extraordinary impact can come from ordinary individuals, making principled choices. Our visitor surveys consistently show that people leave here not just better informed about the Caldwell files specifically, but more committed to speaking up when they witness wrongdoing in their own lives." After their museum visit, Olivia and Miguel drove through Meridian Creek, experiencing the strange duality of a place both familiar and foreign. The town had changed significantly in the decades since they'd lived there. New developments had sprung up. The downtown had been revitalized, and most notably, the North Star manufacturing plant that had been at the center of Teresa Vega's environmental investigations had been demolished and replaced with a nature preserve bearing her name. They parked at the preserve's entrance, where a memorial plaque detailed Vega's work and the circumstances of her death. The creek that had once run toxic with industrial chemicals now flowed clear, supporting native fish species and attracting herons and kingfishers that hunted along its banks. "This is the real legacy," Olivia said softly, watching a school group on a field trip, learning about water quality testing at a monitoring station named for Robert Caldwell. Not the museum or the headlines, but places like this. Environments, healing, communities reclaiming what was poisoned, children learning to protect what others tried to destroy. Their final stop in Meridian Creek was the cemetery, where both Olivia's mother and Teresa Vega were buried. For years, visiting these graves had required elaborate security protocols due to the ongoing threats. Now, with most of those responsible for the crimes documented in Caldwell's files either incarcerated or deceased, they could simply come as ordinary mourners. At her mother's grave, Olivia placed flowers and introduced Miguel properly, without rushed whispers or security agents, scanning the perimeters. "She would be so proud of the man you've become," she told him, remembering how her mother had supported her through single parenthood, through the struggle to balance work and parenting, through the early days of their life-altering discovery before witness protection had separated them. At Teresa Vega's grave, they found fresh flowers already placed, a regular occurrence, the groundskeeper told them, as students, environmentalists and justice advocates made pilgrimages to honor the whistleblower whose death had ultimately sparked a movement. Her parents didn't live to see the preserve completed, Olivia noted sadly, remembering the elderly couple who had attended the Georgetown lecture 5 years earlier. But they did live to see justice served. They died knowing the truth about their daughter's courage. As they left Meridian Creek behind, Miguel's phone chimed with a message that would shape the next chapter of their ongoing story. "It's from Professor Diaz," he said, referring to his journalism mentor at Columbia. "The International Consortium of Investigative Journalists wants to partner with us on the Brazil project. They're offering full resources and global distribution." The Brazil project represented Miguel's emergence as a force in his own right, rather than merely his mother's son. While interning with a human rights organization the previous summer, he had uncovered evidence suggesting that the pattern Caldwell had documented in America, environmental activists being eliminated through staged accidents, was being replicated in the Amazon rainforest. Using the investigative techniques developed through the Caldwell Foundation, combined with his own innovative visual storytelling methods, he had begun documenting suspicious deaths of indigenous environmentalists opposing illegal logging and mining operations. "That's extraordinary, mijo," Olivia said, feeling the complex pride of a parent watching their child take on challenges even more daunting than their own. "The ICIJ has the security protocols and legal resources to do this right." "They want you involved too," Miguel added. They specifically mentioned the Caldwell Foundation's expertise in recognizing the patterns of disguised assassinations. Olivia nodded thoughtfully. In the decades since her discovery, the foundation she had established had evolved into a global resource for documenting and investigating suspicious deaths of whistleblowers, journalists, and activists. Their methodologies, built on Caldwell's meticulous documentation techniques but enhanced with modern technology and international networks, had helped solve dozens of cases worldwide and had prevented countless others by creating systems that rapidly responded when whistleblowers were threatened. "I think this partnership makes sense," she agreed. "But this is your project, Miguel. I don't want to overshadow your work." He smiled at her familiar concern. "Mom, we're way past that. People stopped seeing me as just Olivia Ramirez's son a long time ago. We bring different strengths to this work. The Foundation has the analytical systems and security protocols. I have the visual storytelling techniques that can make complex cases comprehensible to the public. Together with ICIJ's global reach, we could break this wide open." Their conversation continued as they drove to Washington, D.C., where Olivia was scheduled to testify before Congress the following day about proposed international whistleblower protection standards. The Caldwell Foundation was now headquartered in a modest office building near the Capitol, its walls lined with photographs of cases they had helped resolve and individuals they had helped protect. The Foundation's team had grown to 35 full-time staff, plus a network of volunteer experts around the world, former law enforcement officers, forensic specialists, lawyers, journalists, and family members of victims who had transformed their grief into action. What had begun as Olivia's personal mission had become an institution that would outlast any individual. As they entered the Foundation offices, Elena Chen, the former Justice Department investigator who had first helped document the Caldwell files and who now served as the Foundation's security director, greeted them with urgent news. "The Mendoza case just broke open," she announced, referring to a journalist whose car accident in Mexico had shown suspicious patterns similar to cases in Caldwell's files. "Mexican authorities have arrested 3 individuals connected to the cartel we suspected, and one of them is talking. He's confirmed it was a contracted hit ordered by the regional governor. Mendoza was investigating." The Foundation's conference room quickly filled as the team assembled to discuss this development. What had begun with one FBI agent documenting cases alone in a secret basement had evolved into this, a coordinated international response team that could mobilize resources across borders, provide immediate protection to threatened whistleblowers, and ensure that evidence was properly preserved when suspicious deaths occurred. Olivia watched with quiet satisfaction as her team worked, each person bringing specialized expertise to the collaboration. The young lawyer drafting emergency protection motions for Mendoza's sources who might now be at risk. The forensic accountant tracking financial transfers that might connect the arrested hitmen to the governor's office. The security specialist coordinating with Mexican partners to establish safe houses for witnesses. This was the ecosystem of protection and accountability that had grown from the seeds planted in Caldwell's underground files, a system that now regularly succeeded where he had often failed, not because he lacked skill or dedication, but because he had worked alone against forces that required collective response. Later that evening, as Olivia prepared her congressional testimony in her Georgetown apartment, Miguel worked on initial concepts for the Brazil project in the second bedroom that served as his workspace when visiting D.C. Their lives remained in careful balance between public impact and personal safety. Their legal identities had been restored 5 years earlier, but they maintained controlled public profiles and significant security protocols. "I've been thinking about something," Miguel said, joining her in the living room with his laptop. "The gas station museum tells the story of what happened, but not really how it happened. The actual process of documenting and verifying the files, building the cases, protecting the evidence. Olivia looked up from her notes. That's true. The museum focuses more on the outcomes than the methodology. I think that's a missed opportunity, Miguel continued. The how is actually more valuable to people than the what. Anyone can stumble upon evidence of wrongdoing, but knowing what to do with it, how to verify it, how to protect it and yourself, that's the knowledge that can create more Caldwells and Ramirez's in the future. This was typical of Miguel's thinking, always seeking ways to convert individual experiences into replicable systems, to transform their particular story into tools others could use. His journalism reflected the same approach, focusing not just on exposing wrongdoing, but on empowering readers to recognize and respond to similar situations. What are you suggesting? Olivia asked, recognizing the purposeful look that indicated her son had already developed a concept. A practical guide, part book, part interactive resource, that walks people through the process we developed. From initial discovery through verification, documentation, building legal cases, security protocols, media strategy. Everything we learned by trial and error presented as a methodology others could adapt. He opened his laptop to show her a preliminary outline, already substantially developed. I'm calling it the Whistleblower's Handbook. From discovery to justice. It would incorporate case studies from the Foundation's work, practical tools. People could download security checklists, legal resources by jurisdiction. Olivia studied the outline, impressed by its comprehensiveness and practical focus. This wasn't about celebrating their story, but about equipping others to write their own, about creating a resource that Caldwell himself could have used during his lonely years documenting cases in that basement. This is exactly what's needed, she agreed, and it fits perfectly with your journalism background and the Foundation's expertise. We could make it available for free, digitally, with Foundation funding covering the development costs. Miguel nodded enthusiastically. That's what I was thinking, and we could update it regularly as we learn from new cases. It wouldn't just be a static publication, but a living resource that evolves with the field. As they refined the concept, together, Olivia reflected on how far they had come from that desperate mother and child facing eviction, from the paralegal who had purchased an abandoned gas station simply seeking affordable housing. The trapdoor discovery had not just changed their personal circumstances, it had launched them into a mission that continued to expand in scope and impact. The following morning, as Olivia testified before the Congressional Committee on International Whistleblower Protections, she emphasized this evolutionary journey from individual action to systemic change. A decade ago, I was a single mother who accidentally discovered evidence of crimes that powerful people had spent decades concealing, she told the assembled representatives. Today, I lead an organization that has helped create an international infrastructure for protecting truth-tellers and exposing corruption. This transformation represents exactly what we should aspire to in our approach to whistleblower protection. Moving from reliance on accidental discoveries and individual courage to systematic supports and institutional safeguards. Her testimony detailed the practical measures needed, standardized protocols for rapid response when whistleblowers were threatened, international agreements on evidence preservation and witness protection, coordinated legal frameworks that prevented powerful interests from using jurisdictional differences to escape accountability. Robert Caldwell documented crimes for decades, but he worked alone, without institutional support, without legal protection, without the networked resources that might have both preserved his work and preserved his life, she explained. The files I found represented both his extraordinary commitment and the tragic failure of our systems to support those who risk everything to expose wrongdoing. As she concluded her testimony, Olivia gestured to Miguel sitting in the gallery. My son was 10 years old when we found those files beneath an abandoned gas station. Today, he's 20 and preparing to investigate similar patterns of environmental whistleblower assassinations in Brazil. The difference is that he won't be working alone as Caldwell did. He'll have the support of international journalist consortiums, human rights organizations, legal defense networks, and security protocols developed specifically for this work. The committee chair, Senator James Rivera, himself a former prosecutor, who had handled several cases stemming from the Caldwell files, nodded in understanding. You're describing an evolution from heroic individuals to supportive systems. Exactly, Olivia confirmed. We will always need courageous individuals, willing to speak truth to power. But our goal should be to make that courage less costly, to create systems where whistleblowers don't have to sacrifice everything, their careers, their safety, sometimes their lives, to do what's right. As the hearing concluded, Miguel met his mother outside the committee room. You were amazing in there, he said. Clear, specific, compelling. Olivia smiled, thinking of the contrast between this moment and their first days after discovering the files, the fear, the uncertainty, the desperate attempts to understand what they had found and what to do with it. We've come a long way from that gas station floor, but we're still following the path that started there, Miguel observed thoughtfully, still pursuing the same fundamental mission, just with more resources, more experience, more allies. As they walked through the Capitol, congressional staffers and security personnel nodded in recognition. The Ramirez name had become synonymous with a particular kind of principled persistence, with the transformation of accidental discovery into purposeful mission. The abandoned gas station with its secret basement had given them much more than they had ever anticipated, not just shelter when they needed it most, but purpose that had defined the decades since, impact that had transformed institutions, and a legacy that would continue through the systems and methodologies they had developed. What had begun with a desperate mother seeking affordable housing had evolved into a global movement for accountability and justice. What had started with one FBI agent documenting cases alone in a hidden room had grown into an international network of organizations working collaboratively to protect truth-tellers and expose corruption. The concrete trapdoor had opened not just to a basement filled with files, but to a future neither Caldwell nor Olivia could have imagined when they made their solitary choices to stand for truth, regardless of the consequences. That future now included Miguel's generation, armed, with both the ethical clarity that had guided their predecessors and the systematic supports that would make their pursuit of justice less perilous. The gas station was now a museum. The files were now evidence in resolved cases, but the work continued, the endless vigilance required to ensure that powerful interests could not silence those who exposed their wrongdoing, the ongoing development of systems that made justice more accessible and accountability more certain. And at the heart of it all remained the simple moral clarity that had guided both Caldwell and Olivia. The recognition that when confronted with evidence of wrongdoing, the only acceptable response was to act, not because it was easy or safe, but because it was right. 15 years had passed since Olivia Ramirez first descended into the hidden basement of an abandoned gas station and discovered Robert Caldwell's meticulously documented files. The world had changed dramatically during that time. New presidential administrations, shifting geopolitical landscapes, technological revolutions, but perhaps nowhere had change been more profound than in the systems protecting whistleblowers and exposing corruption. On this warm June morning, Olivia stood before a gathering unlike any she could have imagined during those early, terrifying days after her discovery. The International Whistleblower Protection Summit had drawn over 2,000 delegates from 67 countries to Washington, D.C., legislators crafting protection laws, journalists developing secure reporting methods, human rights defenders building support networks, law enforcement officials establishing specialized investigation units, and most importantly, whistleblowers themselves sharing their experiences and needs. 15 years ago, I was a paralegal and single mother facing eviction, Olivia began, her voice carrying through the convention center with practiced ease. At 49, her once dark hair now featured distinguished streaks of silver, and fine lines marked her eyes, evidence of years spent confronting powerful adversaries and comforting countless families seeking justice for loved ones silenced by those in power. I purchased an abandoned gas station at a county auction because it was the only housing I could afford, she continued. That desperate decision led me to discover evidence of crimes that powerful people had spent decades concealing and ultimately transformed not just my life, but our collective approach to protecting truth-tellers worldwide. The summit represented the culmination of work that had begun in that hidden basement, work that had expanded from documenting crimes and seeking justice to creating comprehensive systems that prevented the silencing of whistleblowers in the first place. The audience included people whose lives had been directly impacted by the Caldwell Files cases, those who had built careers implementing the reforms that followed, and a new generation inspired by the movement that had grown from one FBI agent's solitary documentation and one mother's courageous choice. When I first found Robert Caldwell's files, I faced the same impossible dilemma that whistleblowers have confronted throughout history, Olivia explained. I could pursue justice at great personal risk, or I could protect myself and my son by remaining silent. The systems we've built together over the past 15 years are designed to make that choice less devastating, to create paths that allow truth to emerge without requiring martyrdom from those who speak it. The summit's agenda reflected this comprehensive approach. Panels on legal protections across jurisdictions, workshops on secure communications technology, sessions on trauma support for whistleblowers and their families, and collaborative problem-solving for cases that crossed national boundaries. What had begun as Olivia's personal crusade had evolved into a global movement with specialized expertise, dedicated resources, and institutional memory. From her position at the podium, Olivia could see her son Miguel, now a 30-year-old, award-winning investigative journalist, sitting beside his wife Lucia, a digital security specialist he had met during the Brazilian Amazon investigation 10 years earlier. Their 3-year-old daughter Eleanor, named for Agent Diana Chen, who had become family to them, was staying with her other grandmother during the summit. The sight of her son, daughter-in-law, and by extension her granddaughter, brought into sharp focus the full-circle nature of their journey. Miguel had been 10 years old when they discovered the files, 20 when he launched his own investigations in Brazil, and now, at 30, he was not just continuing, but expanding the work, leading a team at the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists specializing in environmental crimes and corporate accountability. The most powerful lesson of the past 15 years, Olivia continued, isn't about the specific cases we've solved or even the reforms we've implemented. It's about the transformation from isolated individuals fighting overwhelming odds to a connected community leveraging collective strength. Robert Caldwell worked alone for decades, documenting crimes without institutional support or protection. Today, no whistleblower should have to face that isolation. The contrast was indeed striking. Caldwell had stored his evidence in a hidden basement, relying on secrecy as his only protection. Now, whistleblowers could access secure digital repositories, maintained by international organizations, encrypted communication channels for sharing evidence, pro bono legal networks specializing in whistleblower defense, and rapid response teams that could provide immediate security if threats emerged. This evolution didn't happen by accident, Olivia emphasized. It required intentional collaboration across disciplines and borders. It demanded that we transform personal outrage into institutional response. Most importantly, it necessitated that we listen directly to whistleblowers themselves about what they needed, rather than imposing solutions from above. As she spoke, Olivia gestured to the wall of truth-tellers displayed prominently in the convention center lobby, photographs and biographies of hundreds of individuals who had exposed corruption, environmental crimes, human rights abuses, and corporate malfeasance worldwide. Some had paid with their lives, others with their careers and reputations, but all had contributed to a growing global commitment to transparency and accountability. We honor these individuals, not just for their courage, but for what their experiences have taught us about building better systems, she explained. Each case has revealed gaps in protection, flaws in legal frameworks, vulnerabilities in security protocols, lessons we've incorporated into continuously improving approaches. Among those featured on the wall was Teresa Vega, the environmental activist whose murder had been documented in Caldwell's files and whose case had been among the first Olivia had helped solve. The Vega Foundation, established by her family after justice was finally secured, had become a leading force in protecting environmental whistleblowers specifically, creating specialized resources for those exposing pollution, deforestation, and climate crimes. Teresa Vega was killed for documenting corporate pollution in my hometown, Olivia noted. For 25 years, her murder remained disguised as an accident, while the corporations responsible continued destroying the environment, and local officials helped cover their tracks. Today, thanks to the protocols developed from her case, when an environmental whistleblower faces threats, an international rapid response network activates within hours, not decades. This wasn't rhetorical flourish, but demonstrated reality. Just 3 months earlier, when an engineer in Malaysia had exposed illegal toxic dumping by a multinational corporation and immediately received death threats, the network had activated emergency protocols, securing evidence, providing physical protection, engaging legal counsel, and generating international media attention that made silencing the whistleblower impossible. The corporation was now facing criminal charges, and the engineer was safely continuing her work with institutional support. This is what justice looks like in practice, Olivia emphasized. Not just punishment after crimes occur, but prevention of silencing in the first place. Not just heroic individuals standing alone, but coordinated communities standing together. After completing her opening address, Olivia joined a panel discussion on the evolution of whistleblower protection, from isolation to ecosystem. The panel included Justice Department investigator Diana Chen, now Assistant Director of the FBI's Public Integrity Section, Michael Winters, whose journalism had helped break the Caldwell Files story, and who now led a global initiative training, reporters in whistleblower protection, and most poignantly, Robert Caldwell's nephew, James Caldwell, who had never known his uncle's true work until the files were discovered. "My uncle died believing he had failed," James Caldwell told the audience, emotion evident in his voice. He documented crimes for decades without seeing justice served. He couldn't have imagined that his work would eventually catalyze a global movement, that his methodology would become a template for whistleblower documentation worldwide, that his solitary struggle would transform into the collaborative ecosystem we see today. The Caldwell Documentation Protocol, developed from the FBI agent's meticulous approach and enhanced with modern digital security, had become standard practice for whistleblowers and investigators globally. Its emphasis on secure preservation of evidence, careful verification, and creation of duplicate records in multiple locations had proven effective against the most common tactics used to suppress whistleblower revelations. After the panel, Olivia participated in a workshop specifically for families of whistleblowers, people like herself who hadn't chosen to expose corruption but had been thrust into support roles when loved ones made that difficult decision. She shared candidly about the challenges she and Miguel had faced during their years in witness protection, the strain on their relationship during periods of intense threat, and the strategies they had developed to maintain some sense of normalcy amid extraordinary circumstances. The truth is, when someone becomes a whistleblower or evidence custodian, everyone who loves them is affected, she acknowledged to the group of spouses, parents, children, and siblings of truth-tellers. You didn't sign up for this role, but you're essential to sustaining those who did. Your support makes it possible for them to continue when the pressure becomes overwhelming. This was an aspect of whistleblower protection that Olivia had pioneered, recognition that effective support required attending not just to the individual exposing wrongdoing, but to their entire support network. The Caldwell Foundation now provided comprehensive family services, from security training for household members to therapy for children affected by threats to practical assistance with relocations or career transitions necessitated by whistleblowing. During a lunch break, Olivia met with a group of law students who had been selected as the inaugural class of Caldwell Ramirez Fellows, a program providing specialized training in whistleblower representation and protection. These 25 students from 15 countries would spend the next year working with the foundation and partner organizations, developing expertise that they would then take back to their home countries to build local capacity. The legal landscape for whistleblowers varies dramatically across jurisdictions, Olivia explained as they discussed their upcoming work. Some of you come from countries with robust protection laws but weak enforcement. Others represent regions where the legal framework itself is hostile to transparency. Your challenge will be adapting global best practices to your specific contexts while building connections that allow whistleblowers to access international support when local systems fail. This approach, simultaneously strengthening local capacity while building global backup systems, had proven effective in creating resilient protection networks that couldn't be easily dismantled by hostile governments or corporations. If a whistleblower couldn't find justice within their own country, pathways existed to international mechanisms, ensuring that powerful interests couldn't simply control all avenues of accountability. The afternoon featured specialized breakout sessions addressing particular whistleblower categories, government employees exposing corruption, corporate insiders revealing fraud, healthcare workers reporting dangerous practices, environmental monitors documenting pollution, and many others. Each type of whistleblowing presented unique challenges, requiring tailored approaches, from industry-specific legal frameworks to specialized evidence-handling protocols. Olivia moved between sessions, observing the evolution of a field that had barely existed when she first discovered Caldwell's files. What had begun as her personal mission to bring justice to victims documented in those records had expanded into a comprehensive discipline with academic programs, professional certifications, dedicated government offices, specialized NGOs, and international treaties. Late in the day, she joined Miguel for a special session on next-generation approaches to truth-telling and accountability. His work had taken the foundation laid by Caldwell and Olivia in new directions, incorporating emerging technologies, collaborative methodologies, and innovative storytelling techniques that reached audiences previously inaccessible to traditional whistleblower narratives. The fundamental challenge remains the same, Miguel explained to the packed room. How do we ensure that evidence of wrongdoing reaches those who can act on it, in forms they can understand and verify, through channels that can't be easily blocked or corrupted? But the tools available to meet that challenge continue to evolve dramatically. He demonstrated the secure reporting platform his team had developed, a system that allowed whistleblowers to submit evidence through encrypted channels. It automatically backed up to secure repositories on multiple continents and connect with appropriate legal, security, and journalistic resources based on the specific nature of their disclosure. The goal is to remove as many barriers as possible between the moment someone decides to expose wrongdoing and the support they need to do so safely and effectively, he explained. Every additional step, every complicated requirement, every moment of confusion represents a point where potential whistleblowers might give up or make mistakes that compromise their security. Watching her son present with confidence and clarity, Olivia felt a surge of pride mixed with wonder at the journey they had traveled together. From the frightened 10-year-old who had worried about having a bedroom with good light for drawing, to this accomplished professional leading innovation in a field they had helped create, Miguel's evolution paralleled the broader transformation of whistleblower protection from desperate individual actions to systematic global response. After the formal sessions concluded, the summit hosted an evening reception honoring individuals who had made extraordinary contributions to whistleblower protection worldwide. Olivia found herself in conversation with Justice Amara Okafor, whose groundbreaking legal opinions on Nigeria's Supreme Court had established whistleblower protections that were now being replicated across Africa. Your discovery of the Caldwell files was our inspiration, Justice Okafor told her. When I was drafting the framework for our whistleblower protection laws, I studied how you handled those files, the methodical documentation, the careful verification, the strategic distribution of evidence to prevent suppression. Those principles informed every aspect of our approach. Similar conversations occurred throughout the evening as Olivia connected with legislators from Brazil, journalists from Ukraine, human rights defenders from Indonesia, and corporate compliance officers from multinational companies, all of whom had adapted aspects of the methods developed from the Caldwell files to their specific contexts. The summit continued for 3 days, with Olivia participating in numerous sessions while also making time for the crucial informal conversations that often led to the most significant collaborations. On the final evening, a special ceremony honored the legacy of Robert Caldwell, posthumously awarding him the International Truth Teller Medal, the highest recognition in the field he had helped create without living to see it established. As James Caldwell accepted the medal on his uncle's behalf, Olivia reflected on the extraordinary chain of events that had connected their lives across time. Robert Caldwell had spent decades documenting crimes in isolation, never knowing if his work would matter. She had purchased an abandoned gas station out of desperate need for affordable housing, never imagining what lay beneath its concrete floor. Together, their separate choices had created something neither could have envisioned, a global movement that had transformed how justice functioned at the highest levels. After the ceremony, Olivia, Miguel, and Lucia walked along the National Mall, enjoying the warm June evening as they discussed the summit's outcomes and next steps. 3-year-old Elena had joined them for the final day, alternating between walking independently and demanding to be carried on her father's shoulders. Her natural exuberance, a reminder of the future they were all working to protect. "The contrast is remarkable," Miguel observed as they passed the Justice Department building illuminated against the darkening sky. 15 years ago, we were hiding from corrupt officials, never certain whom we could trust. Today, we're partnering with government agencies worldwide to institutionalize whistleblower protections. And yet the fundamentals haven't changed, Olivia noted. People in power still abuse that power. Corporations still prioritize profit over safety. Whistleblowers still face retaliation. The difference is that now there are pathways for truth to emerge that didn't exist before, systems that make silencing more difficult. Lucia, whose expertise in digital security had become essential to whistleblower protection in the modern era, added her perspective. The technological landscape has transformed completely since you found those paper files in a basement. The threats have evolved. Surveillance is more sophisticated, disinformation more convincing, tracking more pervasive. But our protective measures have evolved too. As Elena ran ahead to examine a butterfly that had caught her attention, Olivia watched her granddaughter with the complex emotions of someone who had seen both humanity's capacity for corruption and its potential for justice. The world Elena would inherit was neither utopian nor dystopian. It remained a place where power could corrupt and truth required protection, but also a world where systems now existed to support those who chose to speak that truth. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't bought that particular gas station? Lucia asked, voicing the counterfactual question that journalists often raised in interviews. Olivia considered thoughtfully. I used to think about that constantly, whether someone else would have found the files, whether they would have pursued justice, or simply destroyed evidence that complicated their renovation plans. But I've come to believe that truth has a certain persistence. Caldwell created those records because he trusted that someday someone would recognize their significance and act. Maybe it was inevitable that they would eventually find their way to public attention. Their conversation continued as they made their way to the Lincoln Memorial, where they sat on the steps, watching Elena's delight at the illuminated monument. The summit had concluded with concrete commitments. New legislation being introduced in 12 countries, funding for expanded protection programs, technology partnerships to enhance secure reporting platforms, and educational initiatives to train the next generation of whistleblower advocates. When I look at what's been built over these 15 years, Miguel reflected, I'm struck by how much of it stems from lessons learned through trial and error after you found those files. The security protocols developed when we were in witness protection, the documentation methods adapted from Caldwell's original approach, the rapid response systems created after we saw how quickly threats could materialize, even the trauma support. Programs designed based on our own experiences. Olivia nodded in agreement. We've transformed personal challenges into institutional solutions. That's perhaps the most meaningful legacy, not just resolving the specific cases Caldwell documented, but creating systems that make similar cover-ups harder to maintain and similar whistleblowers easier to protect. As Eleanor tired and settled into her father's lap, the three adults gazed across the reflecting pool toward the Washington Monument, contemplating the journey from a hidden basement in an abandoned gas station to this global movement they had helped create. The next phase begins tomorrow, Olivia said, thinking of the implementation work that would follow the summit's commitments. New legislation to draft, protection systems to establish, training programs to develop. The ecosystem continues to evolve. This was the nature of their ongoing work, never truly finished, always adapting to new threats and opportunities, constantly expanding to address gaps revealed by experience. The Caldwell files had been resolved years earlier, with justice finally served for hundreds of victims. But the larger mission of protecting truth-tellers and ensuring accountability continued with each new whistleblower who stepped forward, each new attempt to silence them, Each new system developed to prevent that silencing. As they gathered their things and began the walk back to their hotel, Elena now sleeping against Miguel's shoulder, Olivia felt the profound satisfaction of meaningful work continued across generations. The abandoned gas station that had once represented her desperate attempt to provide basic shelter had instead provided something far more significant. Purpose that had defined not just her life, but now her son's, and perhaps someday her granddaughter's as well. The concrete trapdoor had opened to reveal not just files documenting past crimes, but a pathway to creating more just systems for the future. What had begun with one FBI agent meticulously preserving evidence alone in a hidden room had evolved into a global movement involving thousands of dedicated individuals across disciplines and borders. What had started with one mother's courageous choice to pursue justice despite the risks had expanded into institutional frameworks that made such courage less costly for those who followed. 15 years after her discovery, Olivia Ramirez had helped transform whistleblower protection from heroic individual sacrifice to collective systemic response. The abandoned gas station with its secret basement had given her much more than she had ever sought when placing that desperate bid at a county auction. Not just shelter for her family, but purpose that had altered the landscape of accountability worldwide. And as she walked beside her son, daughter-in-law and sleeping granddaughter through the monuments of a capital where she had once testified in fear for her life and now led international summits, Olivia understood that the true legacy of the Caldwell files wasn't measured in cases solved or criminals convicted, but in systems built and courage enabled, in the creation of pathways that allowed truth to emerge without requiring martyrdom from those who spoke it. The gas station was long gone, now a museum and educational center. The files had been processed through the justice system years earlier. But the work continued, evolving to meet new challenges, expanding to address gaps, adapting to changing technologies and political landscapes. And at its heart remained the simple moral clarity that had guided both Caldwell and Olivia. When confronted with evidence of wrongdoing, the only acceptable response was to act, not because it was easy or safe, but because it was right. Up. Next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.